He married a 21-year-old girl thinking he could manipulate and subdue her, but she showed him pepper. Kola Adejimo prided himself on being a self-made man. At 40, he was the type of man who entered a room and everyone tilted in his direction. He didn't grow up rich. In fact, the one-room shack he'd been raised in didn't even have a proper ceiling or a flushable toilet, but he'd risen, through hard work, calculated cruelty, and ruthless control, to build a life of unimaginable luxury. And he wanted the world to know. Kola's house in Lekki was more of a glass castle than a home. High ceilings, polished marble, an Olympic-worthy pool, and enough rooms to house a small army. He owned properties in 3 states, a fleet of cars, and boasted of a company that sat comfortably among the top 50 in Lagos. But all that glitter had cracks. Cracks that screamed beneath the marble and the golden wallpaper. Cracks that came in the shape of his now ex-wife, Keji. Keji had married him when she was 24, and for the first 3 years, Kola genuinely believed he had found the perfect wife, timid, obedient, stunning, and most importantly, dependent on him. But people change. Not because marriage changes them, not because wealth makes them bold, but because a heart can only take so much hell before it starts to fight for heaven. And Keji had fought back. He remembered the day she told him she was leaving. No fear. No trembling. Just a quiet resignation in her eyes, like someone who had walked barefoot on broken glass too many times to still care about bleeding. "I'd rather sleep under a bridge than stay here and die slowly," she'd said. The reflection in her eyes had shown him the monster she had come to know, one he'd failed to mask behind a crisp white shirt and million naira cufflinks. She left. And Kola had watched her go with a smirk, confident she'd come crawling back eventually. But she didn't. She became a ghost he no longer controlled, and it infuriated him. That was when the thought first entered his mind, "I'll get a new one. Someone younger. Easier. Someone who wouldn't know enough to fight back." At 19, Derin knew what it meant to hunger, not just for food, but for life. She had dreams bigger than the patch of sky her father's thatch roof allowed her to see. She wanted more. More than the dusty roads of her village. More than the cracked mirror in her room that showed her a girl too powerful for her surroundings. Born the last of 4 children, Derin was her mother's beauty, her father's negotiation chip. She had delicate features, eyes too knowing for her age, and skin smooth like the promise of a better tomorrow. She had plans. She was learning fashion design under a roadside tailor, sketching dresses in her worn-out notebook and watching YouTube videos with the cracked Samsung phone she charged at the neighbor's house when there was power. She watched girls in Lagos go live on Instagram with wigs longer than their patience and nails sharp enough to slice dreams, and she watched them eat life with a silver spoon. That would be me someday. But life had other plans, and those plans came wearing a black agbada worth more than the entire contents of her father's parlor. Kola arrived like a film scene, large SUV, cologne that smelled like old money, and a confidence that made even the dust on the floor step aside. He came to greet Derin's father, who, after shouting Kola 10 times, leaned back and listened to Kola's tale, a carefully curated version of the truth. No mention of the beatings. Just the betrayal of an ungrateful wife. Derin's father nodded solemnly, as though he hadn't failed to pay school fees in years. "Women of nowadays," he said, shaking his head. "They've forgotten their place." Derin watched from her room, anger burning at how easily her fate was being traded over bottles of palm wine. The next day, she was summoned, oiled and dressed like a doll she had no desire to be. Kola took one look at her, the full lips, sharp eyes, slim body waiting to blossom, and decided. "Perfect," he said as though he just found a product in the right shade. Her father smiled the smile of a man whose bank account was already imagining the credit alert. But Derin did not smile. The wedding was quick. 1 week, enough time for money to speak, for poverty to bow, and for Derin to be ushered into a world of gold she didn't choose, but would soon learn to rule. Her bride price was paid in full. Her father clasped her hand with a pressure that said, "Don't you dare ruin this." Her mother hugged her stiffly, smelling of camphor and silent pleading. When Kola took her hand as they drove away from the village, Derin felt her skin crawl. He talked in a tone that assumed ownership. He called her my wife, and the words sank cold into her stomach. She said nothing. "Not yet." The mansion in Lagos was beyond imagination. White polished floors, chandeliers that glittered like heaven hung on a thread, an interior so clean Derin felt like she was intruding just by breathing. But she was there. She was in. So let the games begin. She spent the first month quiet, observing, adapting, learning. She played her role. New wigs every week, designer bags, luxury trips. She knew what he wanted, a doll, a trophy. And she played it flawlessly. He made her the deputy VP of his company, a title that came with no real power but enough meeting photos to look good. But even in the softness of silk sheets and Italian vacations, something inside her stayed awake. Watching. Waiting. And then it came. They were back from a weekend trip in Dubai when it happened. She'd just started saying something about a new dress when he snapped. It was quick, fast like the movement of a snake, a slap that turned her head so hard she saw stars. Silence filled the room. Not because there was no sound, but because the sound of betrayal screams the loudest when it's quiet. Kola apologized. He bought her a new car. He touched her chin lightly, like that erased the pain. She nodded, eyes blank. But something cracked inside her. And when something cracks, it doesn't always break. Sometimes, it sharpens. The second slap was worse. That time, he didn't bring a car. He brought excuses. She talked too much. She stayed out too long. She was too friendly with the houseboy. He twisted reality and dared her to doubt him. She didn't argue. She just stopped smiling as often. The third slap took her to the hospital. She was making semo. He wanted vegetable. The semo wasn't ready. He entered the kitchen and the only thing he saw was a reason to bruise her. When she woke up on the hospital bed, her cheek swollen, for lines in her wrist, she didn't cry. She didn't blink. She wasn't even angry. She was planning. Even the doctor who came to check on her felt something chilling in the silence that hung in the room. When her parents were notified, her mother told her to try not to upset him again. That was when Derin finally understood. Her parents had sold her, not married her off. So she closed her heart like a steel door. She wasn't going to die here. No. He was. When she returned home, cola nuts were arranged for her, apologies laid on the table like offerings. He begged. He cried. And she accepted. She became the perfect wife again, affectionate, obedient, predictable. Kola thought he'd reset the switch. He didn't know Derin had already unplugged the system. She began talking to herself in a mirror, but not the mirror in her room. The mirror inside her mind. Planning moves, testing reactions, building courage. Slowly, quietly, she mixed into his world like sugar in tea. Sweet on the surface, fatal at the bottom. The fourth incident was the one that rewired everything. He tried again, in his study, where she had come to ask about a company bill. His hand raised faster than his brain. But this time, Derin did not flinch. She looked at him steady. And said simply, "Try it again. I'll ruin you." He laughed like a lion who thought the cub was playing. That night, she made 3 calls. The next morning, the new Kola strutted into his office building, invaded by arrogance and obliviousness. He stepped out of the car, expecting protocols, greetings, loyalty. He received, instead, a blow to the chest so hard it sent his glasses flying. Street boys swarmed him, blows raining like overdue wrath. He screamed, but no help came. By the time the security intervened, his ribs were cracked, his nose broken, ego in fragments. In the hospital bed, when he opened his battered eyes and saw Derin enter the room laughing, he knew. "You did this," he whispered. "No," she said. "You allowed this." The nurse flushed with discomfort. Kola flushed with fear. And the season of pepper began. The hospital stay was long. Every day Kola woke up with the pain in his bones, pain that traveled from the outside in. The physical wounds hurt, but what hurt more was the realization that Derin was no longer under his control. Now she moved with ease around him. She spoke more. She breathed louder. She commanded. She had the remote in the room, not him. And on many days, when the nurse left, she turned it off and left him in silence. She stopped using his name. Sometimes she simply looked at him like one looks at a broken chair with resentment and calm detachment. Other times, she laughed while he groaned, as though his agony was a comedy special she subscribed to. One afternoon, she arrived with a small cup of juice. Freshly blended fruit. He tasted it and closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he relaxed. Derin looked at him with a faint smile. "Sweet?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Like before?" She nodded. "Savor it. Some sweetness doesn't last long." He didn't understand. But the day he was discharged, he would start to. Kola returned home in a wheelchair. Couldn't walk yet. Could barely swallow his pride. His body had become his prison, and Derin became the jail warden, but with manicured nails and a taste for justice. The driver wheeled him into the sitting room, and something felt different. The house smelled like change. Like someone had shifted things without permission. He sat helplessly while she prepared him dinner, cold yam and burnt stew. "No meat?" he asked in disbelief. She shrugged. "You know you're not supposed to eat heavy things at night. Doctor's orders." "But you're eating chicken," he protested, staring at the drumstick on her own plate. "Yes," she said with a light giggle. "Because I'm healthy." "You're healing." He caught the sarcasm in the word healing but had no energy left to fight. And for days, that was life, tasteless food, awkward silence, and realization. She would feed him once a day, bathe him only when she felt like it. Some nights she'd leave the AC on high and take all the blankets. Once, she even put his tablet just out of reach, watched silently as he tried and failed to pick it from the side table. Derin was no longer the naive girl from the village. Derin was queen. And she ruled with a quiet kind of viciousness. It was a random Tuesday, or maybe it wasn't. Every day had started to blend for Kola in his new age of weakness. He was in the living room, eyes unfocused, when he suddenly heard it. Moaning. Soft at first. Then louder. Derin's voice. The sound of a woman who had forgotten pain. Who no longer cared who listened. At first, he thought the television was on. But then he heard it again, clearer, human, raw. He tried to wheel himself toward the hallway but moved too slow. Then they appeared. Derin, lips bitten, hair all over her face, wearing nothing but a silk robe. And a man behind her, shirtless, hands around her waist, smirking. What's going on?" Kola asked, his voice breaking in shock. The man didn't reply. Derin simply patted the man's chest and said, "You didn't hear the doorbell, old man?" She walked past him. The man followed, hands on her as though marking territory. Kola screamed. He prayed. He cursed. In that moment, the house felt less like a home and more like punishment. Every scream bounced back like an echo of his own sins. And Derin iced it by turning back to look at him once more. "You know what's funny," she said. "You married a child because you thought it would keep you young. But see how quickly age caught up with you." He tried to stand. He fell. And Derin walked away, leaving the sound of her laughter behind. It went on for weeks, Derin and her new man playing lovers in his presence. Sometimes in his bedroom, sometimes even in the hallway. Once, Derin whispered in his ear, "Do you know I never let you touch me this softly? He knows what to do. He knows how to make me smile." One night, after being fed dog food and denied medicine, Kola broke. He broke in a way that had nothing to do with bones or bruises. "Please," he said, voice ragged. "I'm sorry. I won't touch you again. I won't ever raise my hand. I'll give you anything. Just stop." Derin looked at him like a stranger she'd stepped over on the street. "Peace," she said. "You want peace?" "Yes," he croaked. "I gave you that. Many times," she replied. "Before the first slap. Before the first insult. Before the first broken bone." Her eyes grew quiet. "But now. It's too late. You lost your peace when you fed on someone else's fear." He cried. She didn't care. The poison was slow, almost poetic. Tasteless. Silent. Easy to dilute into food and tea. It wasn't meant to kill him fast. Derin wasn't after convenience. She wanted him to watch his life slip without knowing why. She was meticulous. She watched his breathing change slightly every week. She noticed his nagging pain in his joints intensify. She loved how he stopped questioning it after a while, accepting it as karma he couldn't name. Every morning, she would bring a cup of tea to him, always the same cup. And every morning, he would drink it with weary gratitude. Sometimes he would look at her and say, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled back and nodded. "I'm here with you till the end." And she meant it. One morning, Kola didn't wake up. His eyes were open. His mouth slightly parted. But the breath that once brought orders and insults had gone quiet. Derin waited 15 minutes before calling the driver. "Kola is gone," she said simply. The death certificate read, "Cardiovascular complications." Nobody suspected poison. Nobody asked about the dog food or the slap that started the war. Nobody linked the solace of silence he craved at night with the chemical that quietly attacked his organs. A few villagers came for the burial. No emotional outburst. Even his family, estranged for years, left early. But Derin, veiled in black, stood tall beside the casket with no tears shed. Just a slight smile at the corner of her lips. She had gotten everything: the property, the businesses, the house, the cars. She didn't need love. She had control. After the burial, Derin sat for hours in Kola's old chair, stroking the armrest like victory silk. She crossed her legs, wore her turquoise hijab loosely around her hair, and red lipstick that didn't ask permission to exist. She ordered a glass of wine from the house staff. She looked in the mirror, and for the first time in her life, she saw a woman unbroken, unbent, unafraid. Her mind wandered back to Semo and tears. To the phone call with her mother. To the day she felt her cheek swell in the hospital. She smiled. People always underestimated the fire in a woman taught to be silent. Derin left Lagos 6 months later. A quiet exit. No scandals. No dramatic farewell. She moved to Ghana with her lover, not the same one from the house. That one had played his role, but Derin had moved beyond him too. In Ghana, she started a luxury fashion brand, one that quickly became the go-to for the wives of politicians and billionaires. Her brand motto? "No matter how softly a woman walks, her heels make history." And that was Derin. A woman who walked into a nightmare and stitched it into a kingdom. Not every woman escapes. Not every victim survives. But some choose to rewrite the ending not with forgiveness, but with fire.